Salutations! I am Gwen, the ghostess with the mostess, and as your hostess, I am bringing you The Tree. 1920 by H.P. Lovecraft. On a verdant slope of Mount Mayonalis in Arcadia, there stands an olive grove, about the ruins of a villa. Close by is a tomb once beautiful with the sublimest sculptures, but now fallen into as great decay as the house at one end of that tomb, its curious roots displacing the time-stained blocks of Panhellenic marble, grows an unnaturally large olive tree. Oddly repellent shape, so like some grotesque man or death-distorted body of a man, that the country folk fear to pass it at night when the moon shines faintly through the crooked boughs. Mount Mayonalis is a chosen haunt of dreaded Pan, whose queer companions are many, and simple swains believe that the tree must have some hideous kinship to these weird Panny-side. But an old beekeeper who lives in the neighboring cottage told me a different story. Many years ago, when the hillside villa was new and resplendent, there dwelt within it the sculptures Kalos and Muicides. From Lydia to Neapolis, the beauty of their work was praised, and none dared say that the one excelled the other in skill. The Hermes of Kalos stood in marble shrine and cornice, and the palace of Muicide surmounted a pillar in Athens near the Parthenon. All men paid homage to Kalos and Muicide, and marveled that no shadow of artistic jealousy cooled the warmth of their brotherly friendship. But though Kalos and Muicides dwelt in unbroken harmony, their natures were not alike. Whilst Muicides revealed by night amidst the urban Gaietius of Tegea, Kalos would remain at home, stealing away from the sight of his slaves into the cool recesses of the olive grove. There he would meditate upon the visions that filled his mind, and there devise forms of beauty which later became immortal and breathing marble. Idle folk, indeed, said that Kalos conversed with the spirits of the grove, and that his statues were but images of the fauns and dryads he met there, for he patterned his work after no living model. So famous were Kalos and Muicides that none wondered when the tyrant of Syracuse sent them deputies to speak of the costly statue of Tyche, which he had planned for his city. Of great size and cunning workmanship must the statue be, for it was from a wonder of nations and a goal of travelers. Exalted Beyond thought would be he whose work should gain acceptance, and for this honor, Kalos and Mucides were invited to compete. Their brotherly love was well known, and the crafty tyrant surmised that each, instead of concealing his work from the other, would offer aid and advice. This charity producing two images of unheard of beauty, the lovelier of which would eclipse even the dreams of poets. With joy, the sculptors hailed the tyrant's offer, so that in the days that followed their slaves heard the ceaseless blows of chisels. Not from each other did Kalos and Mucides conceal their work, but the sight was for them alone. Saving theirs, no eyes beheld the two divine figures, released by skillful blows from the rough blocks that had imprisoned them since the world began. At night, as of yore, Mucides sought the banquet halls of Tega, while Kalos wandered alone in the olive grove. But as time passed, men observed a want of gaiety in the once sparkling Mucides. It was strange, they said amongst themselves, that depression would thus seize one with so great a chance to win art's loftiest reward. Many months passed, yet in the sour face of Mucides came nothing of the sharp expectancy when the situation arose. Then one day, Mucides spoke of the illness of Kalos, after which none marveled again at his sadness, since the sculptor's attachment was known to be deep and sacred. Subsequently, many went to visit Kalos, and indeed noticed the pallor of his face, but there was about him a happy serenity, which made his glance more magical than the glance of Mucides, who was clearly distracted with anxiety, and who pushed aside all slaves in his eagerness to feed and wait upon his friend with his own hands. Hidden behind heavy curtains stood the two unfinished figures of Taichi, little touched of late by the sick man and his faithful attendant. As Kalos grew inexplicably weaker and weaker, despite the ministrations of puzzled physicians and of his assiduous friend, he desired to be carried often to the grove which he so loved. There he would ask to be left alone, as if wishing to speak with unseen things. Mucides ever granted his requests, though his eyes filled with visible tears at the thought that Kalos should care more for the fauns and dryads than for him. At last, the end drew near, and Kalos discoursed of things beyond this life. Mucides, weeping, promised him a lecture more lovely than the tomb of Mausolus, but Kalos bade him speak no one of marble glories. No more of marble glories. Only one wish now haunted the mind of the dying man, that twigs from certain olive trees in the grove be buried by his resting place close to his head. And one night, sitting alone in the darkness of the olive grove, Kalos died. Beautiful beyond words was the marble flexure which stricken Mucides carved for his beloved friend. None but Kalos himself could have fashioned such vast reliefs, wherein were displayed all splendors of Elysium. Nor did Mucides fail to bury Kalos' close head, the olive twigs from the grove. The first violence of Musaidi's grief gave place to resignation. He labored with diligence upon his figure of Tai Chi. All honor was now his, since the tyrant of Cyprus would have the work of none save him or Kalos. His task proved a vent for his emotion. He toiled more steadily each day, shunning gaieties he once had relished. Meanwhile, his evenings were spent beside the tomb of his friend, where a young olive tree had sprung up near the sleeper's head. So swift was the growth of this tree, and so strange was its form, that all beheld it exclaimed in surprise, and Musaides seemed at once fascinated and repelled. 3 years after the death of Kalos, Musaides dispatched a messenger to the tyrant, and it was whispered in the Agoria at Tega that the mighty statue was finished. By this time, the tree by the tomb had attained amazing proportions, exceeding all other trees of its kind, and sending out a singularly heavy branch above the apartment in which Musaides labored. As many visitors came to view the prodigious tree as to admire the art of the sculptor, so that Musaides was seldom alone. But he did not mind his multitude of guests. Indeed, he seemed to dread being alone now that his absorbing work was done. The bleak mountain wind, sighing through the olive grove and tomb tree, had an uncanny way of forming vaguely articulate sounds. The sky, dark on the evening that the tyrant's emissaries came to Tega. It was definitely known that they had come to bear away the great image of Tai Chi and bring eternal honor to Musaides, so their reception by the proxenoi was of great warmth. As the night wore on, a violent storm of wind broke over the crest of Mainalas, and the men from far Syracuse were glad that they rested snugly in the town. They talked of their illustrious tyrant, and of the splendor of his capital, and exulted in the glory of the statue which Musaides had wrought for him. But then the men of Tega spoke of the goodness of Musaides, and of his heavy grief for his friend, and how not even the coming laurels of art could console him in the absence of Kalos, who might have worn these laurels instead. Of the tree which grew by the tomb, near the head of Kalos, they also spoke. The wind shrieked more audibly, more horribly, and both the Syracusians and the Arcadians prayed to Aiolos. In the sunshine of the morning, the Proxenoi led the tyrant's messengers up the slope to the abode of the sculptor. But the night wind had done strange things. Slaves' cries ascended from a scene of desolation, and no more amidst the olive grove rose the gleaming colonnades of that vast hall wherein Musaides had dreamed and toiled. Lone and shaken mourned the humble courts and lower walls, for upon the sumptuous greater peristyle had fallen squarely heavy overhanging bough of the strange new tree, producing the stately poem in marble with odd completeness to a mound of unsightly ruin. Strangers and Tiagans stood aghast, looking from the wreckage to the great sinister tree, whose aspect was so weirdly human, and whose roots reached so queerly into the sculptured flexure of Kalos. And their fear and dismay increased when they searched the fallen apartment for of the gentle Musaites, and of the marvelously fashioned image of Tai Chi. No trace could be discovered, at which such stupendous ruin only chaos dwelt, and the representatives of two cities left disappointed. Sacrusians that they had no statue to bear home. Tagians that they had no artist to crown. However, the Sacrusians obtained, after a while, a very splendid statue in Athens, and the Tagians consoled themselves by erecting the Argoa, a marble temple commemorating the gifts, virtues, and brotherly piety of Musaites. But the olive grove still stands, as does the tree growing out of the tomb of Kalos. And the old beekeeper told me that sometimes the boughs whisper to one another in the night wind, saying over and over and over again, "Oida! Oida! I know! I know!" So, that was the story. I thought it was interesting. The imagery wasn't as horrific as some Lovecraft stuff, but it's interesting, how instead of competing, one of them died, and then while the other one was in mourning, building near the tree that had sprung up from the one that died basically destroyed the statue of the king that wanted to effectively create a rift between them by picking one over the other. So, Eldritch Tree to commemorate the two brothers. Maybe it houses their souls to this day. I mean, if you interact with fauns and dryads, of course you learn a little bit about immortalizing yourself as a tree. I mean, spooky tree? Better than being a human, I would say. So, it's sad, but I think they're still together in the tree in the tree life. They can spend a tree life together. And it's a spooky tree, so no one's going to be able to cut it down. Because you know how hard it is to cut down a spooky tree. I'm sure. It's really hard. But, that one was a really feelsy one. But I rather like it. And I hope everyone here enjoyed it as well.